April 21st, 1944. North Atlantic, 300 miles southwest of Iceland. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Vincent Gallery stood on the bridge wing of USS Guadalcanal, watching his destroyer Escort screen execute another textbook depth charge pattern against a suspected U-boat contact. The 38-year-old naval officer had grown up on a dairy farm in Illinois, milking cows before dawn and studying by kerosene lamp at night. Nothing in that childhood had prepared him for commanding a hunter-killer group in the most dangerous waters on Earth. But something from those farm years had stayed with him. A dairy farmer learned patience. You couldn't rush a cow. You couldn't force milk production through intimidation. You watched, you waited, you understood patterns, and when the moment came, you acted with absolute decisiveness. Gallery had been applying dairy farm logic to submarine hunting for 6 months, and the results were starting to show. What neither Gallery nor anyone in the Atlantic Fleet knew was that his unorthodox methods, his willingness to ignore naval doctrine, and his insistence on treating U-boat hunting like farming rather than warfare would produce the most spectacular anti-submarine success story of the entire Atlantic campaign. Within 2 months, his task group would accomplish something no American force had achieved since 1812. They would capture an enemy warship on the high seas, intact and operational, delivering intelligence that would help end the Battle of the Atlantic. But first, they had to sink 14 U-boats. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The morning of April 21st had begun with routine tension. Task Group 22.3, designated a hunter-killer group, consisted of the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and 5 destroyer escorts: USS Pillsbury, USS Pope, USS Flaherty, USS Chatelaine, and USS Jenks. Gallery commanded from Guadalcanal, a small escort carrier built on a merchant ship hull, carrying 28 aircraft, mostly Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bombers and Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters, configured for anti-submarine patrol. The concept of hunter-killer groups was relatively new in 1944. Traditional convoy escort involved protecting merchant ships by driving off U-boats, not hunting them aggressively. But by early 1944, the Allies had enough escort carriers and destroyer escorts to form dedicated hunting groups that would actively seek out and destroy submarines, rather than merely defending convoys. Gallery's task group had been operating in the Central Atlantic since January, based out of Norfolk, Virginia. Their hunting ground was the mid-ocean gap, the area beyond the range of land-based aircraft where U-boats had once operated with relative impunity. The gap had been closing as aircraft range improved and escort carriers became available, but it remained dangerous water where German submarines concentrated to attack the Allied supply lines sustaining the war in Europe. The tactical situation in April 1944 favoured the Allies more than at any previous point in the war, but U-boats remained deadly. Germany had lost the technological edge it once held. Allied radar could now detect surfaced submarines at night. High-frequency direction finding, called Huff-Duff, could pinpoint U-boats when they transmitted radio messages. Improved depth charges and ahead-throwing weapons like Hedgehog made attacks more effective. Ultra-intelligence, the code-breaking operation that had cracked German naval codes, provided detailed information about U-boat positions and intentions. But submarines were still submarines, capable of disappearing beneath the waves, of striking without warning, of killing merchant sailors by the hundreds. Every convoy that crossed the Atlantic lost ships to torpedoes. Every U-boat that escaped meant more attacks, more sinkings, more deaths. The only permanent solution was to sink every submarine before it could attack. Gallery understood this arithmetic with the clarity of a man who had calculated milk production and profit margins. You didn't reduce losses by half measures. You eliminated the problem at its source. Sink U-boats faster than Germany could build them, and eventually there would be no U-boats left. It was simple math, though the execution was considerably more complex. Daniel Vincent Gallery had been born on July 10, 1906, in Chicago, Illinois, though his family soon moved to a dairy farm in the rural countryside. The farm was small, perhaps 80 acres, supporting a herd of dairy cattle and a family that believed in hard work and education. Gallery's father had served in the Spanish-American War and believed military service was a path to opportunity for a farm boy with ambition. Gallery was accepted to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis, entering with the class of 1927. He graduated on June 2, 1927, in the middle of his class academically but noted for leadership ability and unconventional thinking. His fitness reports from midshipman years described him as original in his approaches and willing to question established methods, which were polite ways of saying he didn't always follow the book. After graduation, Gallery served the mandatory 2 years at sea before receiving his commission as an ensign. He served on battleships and cruisers, learning navigation, gunnery, and ship handling. In 1930, he qualified as a naval aviator, earning his wings at Pensacola Naval Air Station in Florida. The transition to aviation opened new possibilities. Gallery loved flying, the freedom and the three-dimensional tactical thinking it required. Throughout the 1930s, Gallery served in various aviation assignments, flying fighters and patrol aircraft, instructing at Pensacola, and slowly rising through the ranks. He made lieutenant in 1934, lieutenant commander in 1941, and commander in 1942. His assignments gave him broad experience in aviation operations, but nothing prepared him for the specific challenge of anti-submarine warfare. When the United States entered World War II in December 1941, Gallery was serving as executive officer of a patrol squadron. The immediate priority was defending the East Coast against U-boats. German submarines appeared off American shores in early 1942 and began systematically destroying merchant shipping in what U-boat commanders called the Second Happy Time. Tankers and freighters torpedoed within sight of beaches. The carnage was horrific, and the United States Navy initially lacked the resources to stop it. Gallery participated in anti-submarine patrols, flying PBY Catalina flying boats, searching endlessly for submarines that were nearly impossible to find in the vast ocean. The experience was frustrating. Aircraft would spot a U-boat on the surface, attack with bombs or depth charges, and the submarine would dive and disappear. Confirmation of kills was rare. Most attacks resulted in unknown outcomes. The submarine might be damaged, it might be sunk, or it might be completely unharmed. Without visible wreckage or survivors, there was no way to know. This uncertainty offended Gallery's farm-trained sensibility. On a farm, results were measurable. You knew exactly how many gallons of milk the herd produced, exactly how much grain you harvested, exactly whether your efforts succeeded or failed. Anti-submarine warfare lacked that certainty, and Gallery wanted to change that. He began thinking about how to improve kill confirmation, how to force submarines to surface, how to capture them rather than just sinking them. In November 1943, Gallery received orders to take command of USS Guadalcanal and form a hunter-killer task group. The assignment was a significant promotion and a vote of confidence from Atlantic Fleet headquarters. Guadalcanal was a Casablanca-class escort carrier, one of 50 small carriers built rapidly on merchant ship hulls to provide air cover for convoys and hunting groups. She had been commissioned on September 25, 1943, and was barely 2 months old when Gallery took command. The Casablanca-class carriers were compromises, built for quantity rather than quality. They displaced about 8,000 tons, carried 28 aircraft, and could make 19 knots maximum speed. They were not intended for fleet actions against Japanese carriers or German battleships. They were submarine killers, mobile air bases that could bring air power to the mid-Atlantic gap where land-based aircraft could not reach. Gallery's command included not just Guadalcanal but an entire task group of destroyer escorts. The 5 DEs assigned to him were relatively new ships, commissioned in 1943 and early 1944. Destroyer escorts were smaller and slower than fleet destroyers, but carried sufficient armament for anti-submarine work, including depth charges, hedgehogger head-throwing mortars, and 3-inch guns. The officers and crew of these ships were mostly reservists, civilians in uniform who had learned naval warfare through abbreviated training programs. Many had never been to sea before enlisting. They came from farms, factories, offices, and schools across America. They were electricians and mechanics, clerks and farmers, students and teachers, transformed into sailors through necessity. Gallery recognized in these men the same qualities he valued from his farm background. They were practical, resourceful, willing to work hard, and not bound by peacetime naval traditions that might hinder effective combat operations. He could train them his way, teaching anti-submarine tactics that emphasized aggression, patience, and pattern recognition rather than defensive convoy escort. The training Gallery implemented in late 1943 and early 1944 was unconventional by Navy standards. Instead of practicing formation steaming and communication drills, Gallery emphasized visual recognition of submarine periscopes and surfaced U-boats. He trained his aircraft pilots to coordinate attacks with surface ships, practicing mock runs where planes would drive a submarine toward waiting destroyer escorts. Most importantly, Gallery trained his crews to think like hunters rather than defenders. The task group's mission was not to protect convoys, but to find and kill U-boats. That required understanding submarine behavior, predicting where they would surface, recognizing patterns in their operations, and maintaining contact once detected. It required the patience to search empty ocean for days, followed by the decisiveness to strike immediately when contact was made. Gallery later wrote that he approached U-boat hunting the same way he had approached dairy farming. You studied the herd's behavior, you learned their routines, you anticipated their movements, and when the time came to act, you acted without hesitation. A cow that needed milking wouldn't wait, and a U-boat that surfaced to recharge batteries wouldn't remain vulnerable for long. Timing was everything. The first combat deployment for Task Group 22.3 began in January 1944. The group departed Norfolk and steamed to the Central Atlantic, establishing a patrol area based on ultra-intelligence reports of U-boat positions. The initial weeks were uneventful. The ocean was vast and empty. Day after day, Guadalcanal's aircraft flew search patterns, covering thousands of square miles of water, finding nothing but waves and occasional merchant ships. The destroyer escorts steamed in a screening formation around Guadalcanal, their sonar operators listening for the distinctive sound of submarine screws, their radar operators watching for surface contacts. The routine was monotonous and exhausting. 4 hours on watch, 4 hours off, day after day, week after week, with nothing to show for the effort except fatigue and growing frustration. Gallery maintained morale through a combination of confidence and black humor. He circulated through the task group via small boat, visiting each destroyer escort personally, talking to officers and crew, explaining what they were trying to accomplish. He described U-boats as steel fish that followed predictable patterns. They had to surface periodically to recharge batteries and get fresh air. When they surfaced, they were vulnerable. The task group's job was to be in the right place when that happened. The waiting period tested everyone's patience, but Gallery had learned patience on a dairy farm where results came slowly and predictably. You couldn't force cows to produce more milk by yelling at them, and you couldn't force submarines to surface by searching randomly. You positioned yourself where submarines had to operate. You waited, and eventually they appeared. In late January 1944, the waiting paid off. An Avenger from Guadalcanal spotted a surfaced U-boat approximately 200 miles southwest of the Azores Islands. The pilot reported the sighting and circled while the submarine crash-dived. The destroyer escort Chatelain raced to the location and began a sonar search. The attack that followed demonstrated both the promise and frustration of anti-submarine warfare. Chatelain gained sonar contact and executed a depth charge attack, dropping a pattern of charges set to explode at various depths. The explosions created massive underwater detonations, visible as huge geysers erupting from the ocean surface. Oil slicks appeared, suggesting damage to the submarine, but there was no visible wreckage, no debris, no survivors. The U-boat might be sunk or might be damaged and limping away. There was no way to know with certainty. Gallery was unsatisfied with uncertain results. He wanted visible proof of kills, wreckage that could be photographed, survivors that could be interrogated, confirmation that would allow accurate reporting. The Navy's system for assessing submarine kills required substantial evidence. Many attacks were classified as probable or possible kills, which didn't count in official statistics and didn't provide the certainty that Gallery craved. Over the following weeks, Task Group 22.3 conducted multiple attacks against suspected U-boat contacts. Some attacks produced oil slicks and debris, others produced nothing. The group was getting better at the hunt, refining techniques, improving coordination between aircraft and surface ships. But definitive kills remained elusive. In March 1944, Gallery decided to change tactics fundamentally. Instead of trying to sink submarines with depth charges, he would try to force them to surface and then capture them. The idea seemed impossible by conventional naval thinking. Submarines didn't surrender willingly. Even heavily damaged U-boats typically scuttled themselves rather than allowing capture. German standing orders required submarine commanders to destroy their boats if capture seemed imminent, preventing codes and equipment from falling into enemy hands. But Gallery believed it was possible if the attack was fast enough and overwhelming enough. If a U-boat surfaced and was immediately engaged by gunfire that prevented the crew from scuttling, it might be boarded and captured before destruction could occur. The concept required split-second timing, aggressive seamanship, and a willingness to risk men's lives in close-quarters combat. Gallery began training boarding parties on each destroyer escort. Selected crew members practiced using grappling hooks, climbing nets, and small arms. They studied diagrams of U-boat interiors, learning where scuttling charges would be placed, where valuable equipment was located, how to secure a captured submarine. The training was conducted in secrecy because Gallery had not received authorization for capture attempts. He was acting on his own initiative, preparing for an opportunity that might never come. The opportunity Gallery had been preparing for arrived on April 9, 1944, though not in the way he expected. Task Group 22.3 was operating approximately 300 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands when Guadalcanal's aircraft detected a surfaced U-boat. The submarine was U-515, commanded by Oberleutnant Werner Henke, one of Germany's most experienced and decorated submarine commanders. Henke had sunk 24 Allied ships totaling over 140,000 tons during his career. He held the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, one of Germany's highest military decorations. U-515 was a Type 9C submarine, one of Germany's long-range boats designed for extended patrols in distant waters. The submarine had departed Lorient, France, on March 5th for a patrol in the Caribbean and was transiting through the central Atlantic when Gallery's aircraft spotted it. The Avenger pilot who made the contact reported the sighting at approximately 1000 hours on April 9th. The U-boat was on the surface, recharging batteries and making good speed toward its patrol area. The aircraft approached from the sun, using the glare to mask its approach, then dove to attack altitude. Henke's lookouts spotted the aircraft at the last moment and sounded the alarm. U-515 began a crash dive, but the Avenger was already committed to its attack run. The pilot released depth bombs set for shallow detonation, targeting the swirl where the submarine's conning tower had just disappeared. The bombs detonated close aboard, their underwater shock waves hammering the submarine's pressure hull. Inside U-515, the crew experienced catastrophic damage. The depth bombs had exploded close enough to crack welds and spring hull plates. Water began flooding into the engine room and after compartments. The main motors lost power, the diving planes jammed. Most critically, the submarine could no longer maintain depth control. It began to sink uncontrollably, dropping past its maximum operating depth. Henke faced an immediate decision: continue diving and the submarine would implode from water pressure, killing everyone aboard, or surface immediately and face whatever the Americans had waiting. He ordered emergency surface, blowing all ballast tanks simultaneously. U-515 rocketed toward the surface like a breaching whale, breaking through in a cascade of white water. The destroyer escorts Pope and Pillsbury were racing toward the contact at maximum speed, approximately 20 knots. They arrived just as U-515 surfaced. Both ships opened fire immediately with their 3-inch guns, aiming not to sink the submarine, but to prevent the crew from manning the deck gun or scuttling the boat. Shells struck the conning tower and forward deck, sending fragments screaming across the submarine's hull. German crew members began emerging from the conning tower hatch, hands raised in surrender. Some jumped into the water to escape the shell fire. Others remained below, presumably attempting to scuttle the boat or destroy sensitive equipment. The scene was chaos, with gunfire, men in the water, and a submarine wallowing helplessly on the surface. Gallery, monitoring reports from Guadalcanal, made a split-second decision. He ordered Pope's captain, Lieutenant Commander Edwin Headland, to prepare a boarding party and attempt to capture U-515 intact. The order was unprecedented. No American ship had captured an enemy vessel on the high seas since the War of 1812. The technical challenges were enormous. The legal implications were unclear. The risk to American lives was substantial, but the potential intelligence value of a captured U-boat, with its codes, equipment, and documentation, was incalculable. Gallery had been preparing for exactly this moment, and he was not going to let it pass. Pope maneuvered alongside the submarine while continuing to fire warning shots to keep German crew members away from scuttling stations. A boarding party of 9 men, led by Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David, prepared to jump across to the U-boat. They carried small arms, tools, flashlights, and diagrams of submarine interiors. Their mission was to prevent scuttling, secure the boat for towing, and recover any intelligence materials they could find. At approximately 10:30 hours, with Pope positioned close alongside the submarine, Lieutenant David led the boarding party across. They jumped from Pope's deck to U-515's hull, a gap of approximately 10 feet across rolling seas. The first men across secured lines and helped others follow. Within minutes, 9 Americans were standing on a German submarine's deck while German crew members floated in the water nearby, watching in disbelief. David led his men to the conning tower hatch and descended into the submarine. What they found inside was both promising and terrifying. The interior was abandoned except for the dead, men killed by depth-charge concussions or gunfire. Emergency lights provided dim illumination. Water was flooding into after compartments but had not yet reached critical levels. Most importantly, the scuttling charges had not been activated. The submarine was still intact and potentially salvageable. The boarding party worked frantically. Some men searched for scuttling charges and disabled them. Others located valves to stop the flooding. A third group gathered documents, code books, and equipment. They worked in near darkness, in a submarine that could sink at any moment, surrounded by German sailors in the water outside who might still pose a threat. After approximately 30 minutes of desperate effort, the boarding party confirmed that U-515 was secure. The scuttling charges were disabled. The flooding was controlled. The submarine would not sink immediately. Gallery ordered Guadalcanal to send over a salvage team with pumps and technical experts to assess whether the submarine could be towed to port. But the Atlantic Ocean had other plans. Throughout the afternoon of April 9th, the weather deteriorated. Seas increased from moderate to rough. Wind picked up, creating whitecaps and making control of the submarine increasingly difficult. U-515, damaged and riding low in the water, was taking on more water faster than pumps could remove it. By evening, it became clear the submarine could not be saved. The flooding was too extensive, the weather too severe, the damage too catastrophic. Gallery made the painful decision to abandon the capture attempt and allow U-515 to sink. The boarding party and salvage team evacuated, taking with them everything they could carry: documents, code books, equipment, and intelligence materials. At approximately 1900 hours on April 9th, U-515 slipped beneath the waves and sank in over 2,000 fathoms of water. The first American attempt to capture a German submarine had failed, but it had come remarkably close to succeeding. More importantly, it demonstrated that capture was possible, that submarines could be boarded before scuttling, that the impossible might be achievable with better preparation and better luck. Gallery was disappointed but not discouraged. His boarding parties had proven the concept worked. They had secured a submarine, disabled scuttling charges, and recovered intelligence materials before the boat sank. The next time, with calmer seas and less damage to the submarine, they might succeed in bringing the prize home. Gallery ordered intensified training for boarding parties across the task group. More men learned submarine systems. More equipment was prepared. More techniques were practiced. The hunt continued. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Throughout late April and May 1944, Task Group 22.3 continued operations in the Central Atlantic. The group was becoming increasingly efficient at submarine hunting. Aircraft spotted U-boats with improving frequency. Destroyer escorts prosecuted contacts more effectively. The coordination between air and surface units improved with each engagement. On April 16th, just 1 week after the U-515 engagement, the task group detected another submarine contact. The destroyer escort Chatelaine, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Dudley Knox, gained sonar contact on what appeared to be a submerged U-boat. Knox executed a hedgehog attack, firing the ahead-throwing mortar that launched 24 contact-fused projectiles in an oval pattern ahead of the ship. Hedgehog was a British invention that had revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Unlike depth charges that exploded at preset depths whether they hit anything or not, Hedgehog projectiles only exploded on contact with a submarine's hull. This meant that any explosion confirmed a hit. The lack of explosions meant a miss, allowing immediate re-attack without waiting for the water to settle from depth charge detonations. Chatelaine's Hedgehog attack produced multiple explosions, indicating hits on the target. Oil and debris surfaced, including wooden fragments, clothing, and human remains. The submarine had been destroyed, though its identity would remain unknown until post-war German records were examined. It was later determined to be U-188, lost with all hands. The pattern repeated throughout May. Task Group 22.3 detected contacts, prosecuted attacks, and achieved kills with increasing regularity. The group's success rate was climbing above the Atlantic Fleet average, and headquarters took notice. Gallery's methods, unconventional as they were producing results that could not be ignored. But Gallery wanted more than just confirmed kills. He wanted a captured submarine. He wanted to bring home an intact U-boat with all its secrets, its codes, its equipment, its design features. The intelligence value would be enormous, but beyond that, Gallery wanted to prove it could be done. No one had captured an enemy warship in modern naval warfare. It would be a triumph of seamanship, courage, and that dairy farm patience that had served him so well. The opportunity came on June 4, 1944, and it would produce the most spectacular success of Gallery's career. Task Group 22.3 was operating approximately 150 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands, the same general area where U-515 had been engaged 2 months earlier. The weather was calm, seas moderate, visibility good, ideal conditions for air operations. At approximately 1100 hours, an Avenger from Guadalcanal's Composite Squadron 8 spotted a fully surfaced U-boat, approximately 30 miles from the task group's position. The submarine was U-505, a Type 9C boat commanded by Oberleutnant See Harald Lange. U-505 had departed Brest, France, on May 25 for a patrol in the South Atlantic and was transiting through the Central Atlantic when spotted. The Avenger pilot, knowing Gallery's standing orders about submarine contacts, immediately reported the sighting while beginning an attack run. The U-boat's lookouts spotted the aircraft and sounded the alarm. Lange ordered crash dive, standard procedure when surprised by aircraft. But this time, fate intervened in Gallery's favor. As U-505 began its dive, the submarine's diving planes malfunctioned. Exact cause would never be determined. Possibly damage from previous depth charging, possibly mechanical failure, possibly crew error in the panic of crash diving. The submarine tilted bow down and began an uncontrolled descent. Inside the pressure hull, crew members struggled to regain control. Emergency procedures were initiated, but the submarine continued diving past safe limits. At approximately 200 feet depth, with the hull groaning from water pressure and the submarine still descending, Lange made the same decision Werner Henke had made 2 months earlier. He ordered emergency surface, blowing all ballast tanks. U-505 shot toward the surface and broke through in a violent eruption of water and foam. But this time, Gallery's preparation paid off. 3 destroyer escorts, Pillsbury, Chatelaine and Jenks, were already racing toward the contact at maximum speed. They arrived within minutes of U-505 surfacing. All 3 ships opened fire immediately, not aimed to sink but aimed to suppress, to prevent scuttling, to keep German crew members away from deck guns and scuttling valves. 3-inch shells screamed across the water, striking U-505's conning tower and deck. The accuracy was deliberate. The gun crews trained specifically for this scenario. They were not trying to destroy the submarine. They were trying to capture it. German crew members began pouring out of the conning tower hatch, many with hands raised, others jumping directly into the water to escape the shell fire. Gallery, monitoring reports from Guadalcanal's radio room, recognized immediately that this was the opportunity he had been preparing for. The submarine was severely damaged, unable to dive, and the crew was abandoning ship. If the boarding party moved fast enough, if the scuttling charges could be disabled before detonation, if the submarine remained afloat long enough to secure it, this time the capture might succeed. He issued orders that would change. Naval history. All ships were to cease fire immediately except for warning shots. Pillsbury was to prepare boarding party for immediate deployment. No one was to sink that submarine. Gallery wanted it intact, operational, and towed to Bermuda. The orders were clear, unprecedented, and slightly insane by conventional naval wisdom. Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David, the same officer who had boarded U-515 2 months earlier, prepared his boarding party aboard Pillsbury. David was 24 years old, a 1942 Naval Academy graduate who had been assigned to destroyer escort duty immediately after commissioning. He had volunteered for boarding party duty when Gallery first proposed the concept, and he had led the U-515 boarding that had come so close to success. David selected 8 men to accompany him. The boarding party included Radioman 2nd Class Stanley WWII, Radioman 3rd Class Arthur Knispel, Torpedoman's Mate 3rd Class Zenon Lucosius, Electrician's Mate 3rd Class Gilbert Hoverter, Machinist's Mate 1st Class Gleason Dorr, Motor Machinist's Mate 2nd Class Wayne Pickles, Boatswain's Mate 1st Class Chester Mokarski, and Signalman 3rd Class Gordon Brewer. Each man knew the risks. Each man volunteered anyway. Pillsbury's captain, Lieutenant Commander George Castleman, manoeuvred his ship alongside U-505 with extraordinary skill. The seas were moderate but still dangerous for close-quarters ship handling. One miscalculation could result in collision that would sink both vessels. Castleman brought Pillsbury to within 20 feet of the submarine, close enough for men to jump across, but far enough to avoid collision as both vessels rolled in the swells. At approximately 11:20 hours, just 20 minutes after U-505 had surfaced, Lieutenant David jumped from Pillsbury's deck to the submarine's hull. His 8 men followed immediately. They carried side arms, tools, flashlights, and portable damage control equipment. Their mission was identical to the previous attempt: prevent scuttling, control flooding, secure the submarine for towing. But this time, conditions were dramatically different. The weather was calmer, the submarine damage was less severe. Most importantly, the German crew had abandoned ship more quickly, giving them less time to activate scuttling charges or destroy equipment. The boarding party had a genuine chance of success. David led his men to the conning tower hatch and descended into U-505's interior. What they found was both eerie and promising. The submarine was abandoned, empty of crew except for one severely wounded German sailor who had been left behind. Emergency lights provided illumination. The diesel engines were still warm, having been shut down only minutes earlier. Equipment was intact, documents were scattered on chart tables, code machines sat in their mounts, everything exactly as it had been when the crew abandoned ship. But water was flooding into the submarine. The exact source was difficult to determine in the dim light and confusion. Seawater was entering through damaged hull seals, through open vents, through ruptures caused by depth charge damage from previous attacks. The submarine was settling deeper in the water with each passing minute. The boarding party split into teams. Radioman WWII and Radioman Knispel headed for the radio room to secure codebooks and encryption equipment. Torpedoman Lucosius and Electrician Hovater searched for scuttling charges and demolition devices. Machinist Dorr and Motor Machinist Pickles worked to stop the flooding, closing valves and securing hatches. Boatswain McCaskey and Signalman Brewer gathered documents and equipment. Lieutenant David coordinated the effort while searching for explosive charges that might have been set with time delays. German submarine doctrine required destruction of the boat if capture was imminent, but the doctrine also recognized that crew survival took precedence. If the crew had to abandon ship quickly to save their lives, destroying the submarine became secondary. The critical question was whether someone had activated scuttling charges before abandoning ship. David and his men searched frantically for demolition charges, checking every location where explosives might be placed. They found charges near the diesel engines, charges in the torpedo rooms, charges near the electric motors. But crucially, none had been activated. The detonators were not installed, the charges were inert, the submarine could be saved. Gallery received the report from David via sound-powered telephone rigged between Pillsbury and the submarine. The news was almost too good to believe. U-505 was secure, the crew had abandoned it without activating scuttling charges, and the submarine was still afloat despite flooding. For the first time in modern naval history, an enemy warship had been captured on the high seas, intact and operational. But the submarine was still in danger of sinking. Water continued flooding into damaged compartments faster than the boarding party could control it. Gallery ordered Guadalcanal to send over a salvage team with portable pumps, damage control equipment, and technical experts. The carrier's damage control officer, along with additional sailors trained in submarine systems, transferred to U-505 via small boat. Throughout the afternoon of June 4th, American sailors worked inside a German submarine, fighting, flooding, securing equipment, and preparing the boat for towing. It was surreal and historic simultaneously. These men, most of whom had never seen the inside of a submarine before, were saving an enemy vessel from sinking through sheer determination and improvisational skill. The salvage effort succeeded. By late afternoon, the flooding was controlled. Portable pumps were keeping up with water ingress. The submarine was stable, riding low but afloat. Gallery ordered Guadalcanal to prepare a towing rig. The carrier would take U-505 in tow and bring it to Bermuda, 1,700 miles to the northwest. The tow began at approximately 1800 hours on June 4th. Guadalcanal passed a heavy steel cable to the submarine, securing it to U-505's bow. The carrier began pulling the submarine at approximately 4 knots, barely faster than walking speed, but movement nonetheless. 3 destroyer escorts formed a protective screen around the carrier and its prize. 2 additional destroyer escorts searched for other U-boats that might attack. The voyage to Bermuda took 6 days. Throughout that time, American sailors remained aboard U-505, maintaining pumps, monitoring flooding, and ensuring the submarine remained stable. The men worked in shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, day and night, in a submarine that could sink at any moment. They ate cold rations, slept on deck when they could, and endured conditions that would have tested the toughest sailors. Gallery later wrote that watching U-505 under tow was one of the most satisfying moments of his life. Not because of the glory or recognition, though both would come, but because the result was measurable and undeniable. The submarine was there, visible proof of success, no uncertainty, no probable kill assessment, no wondering if the attack had worked. They had captured an enemy submarine, and they were bringing it home. On June 10, 1944, Task Group 22.3 arrived at Bermuda with U-505 in tow. The arrival created a sensation. Word had spread through the Atlantic Fleet that Gallery had captured a U-boat, but seeing it was different from hearing about it. Hundreds of sailors lined the docks at the Royal Navy dockyard to watch the German submarine being brought in. Photographers documented every moment. Senior officers came to inspect the prize personally. U-505 was taken to a secure dock where Navy, intelligence teams and technical experts could examine it thoroughly. The submarine was a treasure trove of information. Every system, every piece of equipment, every document aboard provided intelligence about German submarine capabilities, tactics, and technology. But the most valuable items were the code machines and code books recovered by the boarding party. Germany used Enigma cipher machines for naval communications, complex electromechanical devices that encrypted messages in patterns that changed daily based on settings derived from codebooks. Allied code breakers had been reading German naval codes for years through ultra-intelligence, but the effort required constant updating as Germans changed code settings and procedures. Captured code materials allowed immediate reading of German messages without the laborious process of breaking new settings. The Enigma machine and codebooks from U-505 provided intelligence that contributed directly to Allied success in the Battle of the Atlantic. German U-boat dispositions, patrol areas, and operational orders could be read in near real time. Allied convoys could be routed around concentrations of submarines. Hunter-killer groups could be vectored toward U-boats with precision. The intelligence advantage was overwhelming, and U-505's capture enhanced that advantage significantly. But the intelligence value had to remain secret. If Germany learned that U-505 had been captured intact with codes and equipment, they would immediately change all code systems and procedures, rendering the captured materials useless. Gallery received strict orders from Washington. The capture must be classified at the highest level. No publicity, no press releases, no public acknowledgement. As far as the world knew, U-505 had been sunk, not captured. Gallery complied with the secrecy requirements, though it pained him. He had achieved something unprecedented in modern naval history, and he could not tell anyone. His crew had performed brilliantly, and they could not be publicly recognized. The boarding party had risked their lives and succeeded, and they had to remain anonymous. The only satisfaction came from knowing what they had accomplished, and from the private recognition within the Navy. Lieutenant Albert David received the Medal of Honor for leading the boarding party, the first time a naval officer had received the nation's highest decoration for actions in a boarding operation since the 19th century. The citation read in part that he displayed great ingenuity and daring in boarding the hostile submarine as it lay wallowing on the surface, and by his exemplary courage and leadership, he inspired his men to carry on and complete their mission in the face of great personal danger. The other 8 members of the boarding party each received the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor. Their citations remained classified for security reasons, preventing public recognition of their accomplishments. Only after the war ended could the full story be told. Only then could the American public learn that their Navy had captured a German submarine and brought it home. Gallery was promoted to captain and continued commanding Task Group 22.3 for the remainder of 1944. The group continued hunting U-boats with the same aggressive tactics that had produced the capture of U-505. Throughout the summer and fall of 1944, Gallery's task group sank additional submarines, though none were captured intact. The final tally for Task Group 22.3 under Gallery's command was impressive by any measure. Official Navy records credit the task group with sinking or contributing to the sinking of multiple U-boats during 1944. The exact number varies depending on how kills are attributed, but most historians credit Gallery's task group with at least 6 confirmed U-boat kills, plus the capture of U-505, over approximately 9 months of operations. The title of this story references 14 U-boats in 6 months, and while Gallery's personal task group did not achieve that exact number, the broader hunter-killer campaign that he helped pioneer did achieve similar results across multiple task groups. The tactics, training methods, and aggressive approach Gallery developed were adopted throughout the Atlantic Fleet's hunter-killer groups, contributing to the cumulative destruction of the U-boat force during 1944 and 45. Gallery's innovation was not a single technological breakthrough or tactical maneuver. His contribution was philosophical, transforming anti-submarine warfare from defensive convoy protection to offensive submarine hunting. He proved that hunter-killer groups could find and destroy U-boats faster than Germany could replace them. He demonstrated that submarines could be forced to surface and captured. Most importantly, he showed that unconventional thinking, drawn from experiences far removed from naval warfare, could solve problems that conventional doctrine could not. The dairy farm boy who had learned patience by milking cows had applied that patience to hunting submarines. He had understood that you could not rush results, that you had to position yourself correctly and wait for the right moment, and that when the moment came, you acted decisively. Those lessons, learned in rural Illinois decades earlier, had translated perfectly to the North Atlantic in 1944. After the war, Gallery continued his naval career, eventually rising to Rear Admiral. He served in various assignments, including command of the carrier USS Hancock and Chief of Staff to the Commander Air Force's Atlantic Fleet. He retired from the Navy in 1960 with 33 years of service and wrote several books about his experiences, including 20 Million Tons Under the Sea, which detailed the U-505 capture. Gallery's writing revealed the same unconventional thinking that had characterized his command style. He criticized bureaucratic inefficiency, questioned established procedures, and advocated for innovation. His books were popular with sailors who recognized the authentic voice of someone who had actually done the job, not just studied it in staff colleges. Gallery died on January 16, 1977, at age 70, having lived long enough to see his accomplishments recognized and appreciated. Lieutenant Albert David, the Medal of Honor recipient who led the boarding parties, left the Navy after the war and returned to civilian life. He worked as an executive for General Electric and later taught at the Harvard Business School. He rarely spoke publicly about his wartime service, deflecting attention to the men who had served with him. David died on May 18, 1988, at age 68. The 8 sailors who accompanied David in boarding U-505 scattered after the war. Some remained in the Navy, others returned to civilian occupations. Their names, once classified for security purposes, eventually became public as the U-505 story was declassified. Each received recognition for their courage, though most preferred to avoid publicity. They had done their duty, survived the war, and wanted nothing more than to return to normal life. U-505 itself had a brief but significant post-war career. After the war ended in May 1945, the submarine was used for technical evaluation and training. Navy personnel studied its design, tested its systems, and learned everything possible about German submarine technology. The information gathered informed American submarine design for decades. In October 1946, U-505 participated in Operation Deadlight, the systematic destruction of captured German submarines. Most U-boats were towed out to sea and sunk by gunfire or used as target practice, but U-505 received special treatment. The submarine that had provided so much intelligence, that had been the first enemy warship captured in over a century, deserved better than to be simply blown apart. The Navy decided U-505 would be used in weapons testing to evaluate the effectiveness of new anti-submarine weapons. The submarine was towed to waters off Cape Cod, Massachusetts, instrumented with sensors and monitoring equipment, and subjected to attacks by various weapons systems. Torpedoes, depth charges, hedgehog projectiles, and aerial bombs were used against the submarine in carefully controlled tests. The data gathered provided valuable information about how submarines responded to different types of attack, which weapons were most effective, and how future submarines could be designed to survive battle damage. U-505's final contribution to naval warfare came through its destruction, teaching lessons that would protect submariners in future conflicts. On November 10, 1947, U-505 was finally sunk off the Massachusetts coast. The exact location remains classified, though the general area is known. The submarine that had survived capture, towing, examination, and weapons testing finally succumbed to the Atlantic it had once prowled. Its hull rests on the bottom, a monument to the men who built it, the men who served in it, and the men who captured it. The broader impact of Gallery's innovations extended far beyond a single captured submarine. The tactics and training methods he developed became standard throughout the U.S. Navy's anti-submarine forces. Hunter-killer groups proliferated in 1944 and 45, sinking U-boats at rates Germany could not sustain. The Battle of the Atlantic, which had raged since 1939, turned decisively in the Allies' favor during 1944. Germany's submarine force, which had been the Third Reich's most effective weapon against Allied shipping, was systematically destroyed. Young, inexperienced U-boat crews were sent to sea in submarines that were detected, tracked, and sunk before they could attack a single ship. The survival rate for German submariners became the lowest of any service in any nation during World War II. Approximately 75% of U-boat crew members who went to sea did not return. The statistics were brutal and conclusive. In 1942, when U-boats operated with relative freedom, they sank over 6 million tons of Allied shipping. In 1943, improved anti-submarine tactics reduced losses to approximately 3 million tons. In 1944, when hunter-killer groups like galleries were fully operational, U-boat sinkings dropped to less than 600,000 tons. In the first 4 months of 1945, before Germany's surrender, U-boats sank less than 200,000 tons. The trend was unsustainable for Germany. U-boats were being sunk faster than shipyards could build them. Experienced crew members were dying faster than training schools could replace them. The technology that had given Germany an advantage early in the war, long-range submarines with extended endurance, became irrelevant when Allied aircraft and ships could find and sink submarines anywhere in the Atlantic. Gallery's contribution to this transformation was significant but not singular. He was one of many innovative commanders who developed effective anti-submarine tactics, but his willingness to think unconventionally, to draw on experiences outside traditional naval warfare, to question established doctrine and procedures, made him particularly effective. The dairy farmer's son had brought to naval warfare a perspective that career naval officers often lacked, a practical, results-oriented approach that valued measurable success over adherence to doctrine. The lessons from Gallery's career remain relevant decades after his death. Organizations, whether military or civilian, benefit from diverse perspectives and unconventional thinking. The assumption that expertise must come from within a field, that only those with traditional backgrounds can contribute meaningful innovations, limits potential breakthroughs. Gallery's dairy farm upbringing did not disqualify him from naval command. It provided unique insights that enhanced his effectiveness. The willingness to question established procedures, to experiment with new approaches, to accept risk in pursuit of better outcomes. These characteristics defined Gallery's leadership. Not every innovation succeeded. Some of his ideas failed or proved impractical, but the willingness to try, to test, to learn from failure created an environment where success became possible. The capture of U-505 succeeded not because of luck but because of preparation. Gallery had trained boarding parties for months before the opportunity arose. He had developed tactics specifically designed to enable capture rather than just destruction. He had positioned his task group in areas where submarines operated. When the moment came, his ships and sailors executed perfectly because they had practiced the procedures repeatedly. Success appeared effortless to outside observers who saw only the final result, the captured submarine being towed into port. They did not see the months of preparation, the failed attempts, the training drills, the refinement of techniques. They did not see the U-515 capture attempt that almost succeeded but failed due to weather and damage. They saw only the triumph and assumed it was easier than it actually was. Gallery understood this perception and worked to correct it in his post-war writings. He emphasized that success came from preparation, training, and willingness to accept failure as part of the learning process. The capture of U-505 was not a miracle or a lucky break. It was the culmination of systematic effort to develop capabilities that did not exist when Gallery took command. The comparison to dairy farming, which Gallery himself made repeatedly, was not merely colourful rhetoric. The skills were genuinely transferable. Patience, observation, pattern recognition, timing, these attributes applied equally to milking cows and hunting submarines. The contexts were radically different, but the underlying cognitive processes were similar. Modern military forces recognize this principle in ways that Gallery's contemporaries did not. Diverse recruitment, education in multiple disciplines, and encouragement of unconventional thinking are now understood as sources of innovation and competitive advantage. The assumption that military problems require only military solutions has been replaced by recognition that insights from business, science, agriculture, and other fields can enhance military effectiveness. Gallery's career exemplified this principle before it became doctrine. His background as a dairy farmer's son did not limit him. It enhanced his effectiveness by providing perspectives that pure military training might have excluded. His willingness to apply those perspectives to naval warfare, despite skepticism from traditionalists, produced results that vindicated his approach. The men who served under Gallery benefited from his unconventional leadership style. He treated them as capable individuals rather than interchangeable parts of a military machine. He explained his reasoning rather than simply issuing orders. He encouraged initiative and rewarded innovation. The result was a task group that performed at levels exceeding expectations, not because the ships were superior or the equipment was better, but because the people were fully engaged and empowered. This human dimension of leadership often receives less attention than technical or tactical aspects, but it was crucial to Gallery's success. His crews believed in him because he believed in them. They took risks because he had prepared them to succeed despite risks. They accomplished the impossible because he had convinced them it was possible. The boarding party that captured U-505 consisted of 9 young men, most barely out of their teens, who volunteered for duty that could easily have killed them. They jumped onto an enemy submarine that might explode or sink at any moment, descended into a vessel that could become their tomb, and worked for hours in darkness to secure a prize for their nation. They did this because their commander had trained them, trusted them, and inspired them to believe they could succeed. Lieutenant Albert David, leading those men, exemplified the courage and leadership that made the capture possible. At age 24, with only 2 years of naval service, he was responsible for accomplishing what no one had done in over a century. He succeeded not through superhuman abilities, but through thorough preparation, clear thinking under pressure, and absolute commitment to the mission. The 8 sailors who followed David onto U-505 represented the American military at its best. They were ordinary young men from ordinary backgrounds, transformed by training and leadership into extraordinary performers. Their names deserve remembrance: Stanley WWII, Arthur Knispill, Zenon Lukosius, Gilbert Hoverter, Gleason Dorr, Wayne Pickles, Chester Mokarski, Gordon Brewer. Each risked everything. Each contributed to success. Each returned home when the war ended and resumed the civilian lives they had temporarily set aside. The German sailors aboard U-505 also deserve acknowledgement. They fought their war according to their understanding of duty and honor. When capture became inevitable, most surrendered rather than dying needlessly. One severely wounded sailor was left behind when the crew abandoned ship, cared for by the American boarding party, and eventually recovered. The humanity shown by both sides in that moment, Americans saving a German sailor's life while capturing his submarine, demonstrated that even in war's violence, decency remained possible. Oberleutnant See Harald Lange, U-505's commander, survived the war and provided detailed information to Allied interrogators about submarine operations and tactics. His cooperation contributed to understanding of U-boat warfare and helped inform post-war assessments of the Battle of the Atlantic. Lange returned to Germany after release from prisoner of war status and lived into old age, one of the fortunate submarine officers who survived a service with the highest casualty rate of any military branch in World War II. The story of how Gallery's task group captured U-505 spread through the Navy after the war's end and classification restrictions were lifted. It became legend, the tale of the dairy farmer's son who thought like a hunter, trained like a farmer, and fought like a warrior. Subsequent generations of naval officers studied the operation, analyzing what made it successful, extracting lessons applicable to their own challenges. The most important lesson was perhaps the simplest: results matter more than methods. Gallery had achieved what conventional doctrine said was impossible by refusing to accept conventional limitations. He had questioned assumptions, experimented with alternatives, and persisted despite setbacks. The reward was success that vindicated his approach and demonstrated what determination combined with intelligence could accomplish. The 14 U-boats referenced in this story's title represent not just Gallery's personal task group's achievements, but the broader success of the hunter-killer campaign he helped pioneer. Multiple task groups, employing tactics Gallery developed or inspired, sank U-boats throughout 1944 and 45 at rates that destroyed Germany's submarine force as an effective weapon. The cumulative impact shortened the war, saved countless merchant, sailors' lives, and ensured that supplies reached Europe to sustain the Allied armies that ultimately defeated Nazi Germany. Gallery's personal contribution to this success was significant, measurable, and lasting. He transformed anti-submarine warfare from defensive reaction to offensive hunting. He proved submarines could be captured, not just sunk. He trained crews who performed at exceptional levels. He led by example, innovation, and unwavering commitment to success. Most importantly, he demonstrated that unconventional backgrounds and unconventional thinking could solve conventional problems better than tradition and orthodoxy. The dairy farm in Illinois, where Gallery learned patience by milking cows, seemed infinitely removed from the North Atlantic, where U-boats prowled and died. But the distance was illusory. The skills were transferable. The lessons were universal. The young man who milked cows before dawn became the naval officer who captured submarines at sea, not despite his background but because of it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.